What is thinAir Sports adaptive altitude training and why it differs and why it's better than traditional methods? So traditional methods of altitude training would be either going to altitude to actually do training camps or usually, more often, done within an altitude chamber environment. These environments usually have the oxygen level reduced down from sort of 20.9% down to 10-11% oxygen in the air that's been breathed. And the athlete usually has to train within that environment, either on a treadmill or on a bike, to try and elicit change. Now, that is a very, very generic approach to training. Just as we'd put every athlete on an individualised strength and conditioning plan, an individualised nutrition and supplementation plan, we should also put them on an individualised programme for altitude training. Everybody's lungs are adapted slightly differently, everybody's lungs work slightly differently, and delivering them a generic training session that is exactly the same for everybody doesn't make any scientific sense whatsoever. And that's sort of what traditional altitude training has done so far. So what is thinAir Sports adaptive altitude training? How does that differ and how does it address those problems? Well, first of all, adaptive altitude training. So with our thinAir Sports machines, you are wired up to the machine at all times. You wear a pulse oximeter on the ear, and that pulse oximeter is using infrared to determine how much oxygen you have in your bloodstream at all times. It takes a measurement every single second, and depending upon what your body's response to the reduced oxygen that you're breathing from the machine and the air that the machine is giving you will depend on what happens next. So if your body's coping and the oxygen is taking too long to drop, the oxygen level's taking too long to drop, it means you're coping pretty well. The machine will step the oxygen level down, maybe down to 10, 9.5, 9% oxygen. If your body is struggling and your oxygen levels are dropping too quickly, therefore the machine will then respond accordingly. It will step your levels up, so you might go up to 11.5, 12, 12.5, 13% until your body can cope. And it's that adaptive nature of the training program that means this works for everybody. So traditional altitude training methods would work for about 25% of athletes. They'll get a massive boost. About 25% of athletes sort of stay about where they are, and 50% of athletes actually get more injury prone and more fatigued because they're not adapted correctly for that environment. By utilising thinAir Sports adaptive altitude training, it works for 100% of athletes. On top of this, the one big differentiator on top of that makes a real difference, particularly if we're talking about injured players, is the fact that the machine requires zero exercise. And I'll repeat that, zero exercise at all. You sit down, nice big comfy armchair, place an oxygen mask over the mouth and just breathe the reduced oxygen air that the machine gives you. The machine does the rest. So it's a very, very different process to that of traditional altitude training. Now, what are the benefits of doing adaptive altitude training? What's it actually going to do for the athlete? What's it going to do for your performers? First and foremost, it stimulates the circulatory system. If you've got an injured athlete, they're going to be suffering with inflammation the majority of the time. What it will do is it will flush that inflammation out of the body. So it's going to speed up the healing process by getting rid of inflammation. Secondly, by the process you go through during altitude training to produce the new red blood cells, you also produce new stem cells. Both happen within the bone marrow, and by doing that, again, you're going to get a speeding up of the results from getting a player back to full fitness. On top of that, they're going to sleep better, they're going to sleep deeper, so again, from a recovery angle, that's going to make a big difference, but also on an energy level basis, day to day, in the morning, lunchtime, in the afternoon, in the evening, they're going to have a higher level of energy across the day, so they can train harder and they can recover faster. As well as those benefits, you also get a big improvement from a DOMS point of view, a muscle soreness point of view, so post-training sessions, particularly rehab sessions, it can be quite tough. Waking up the next morning stiff, sore, that will dramatically reduce by utilising thinAir Sports adaptive altitude training too. So it has a wide range of benefits. What I will do is I can send a covering email across, but just outlining these things in a bit more detail and a bit more of the science behind them. But hopefully this little short video is giving you a bit of an idea of what it could do. You've also got some testimonials that I've put into the Dropbox as well. The reason being that they are high performance athletes. You're talking about an England rugby player, you're talking about a boxer signed with Frank Warren, you're talking about an Olympic, World and Commonwealth Games European hammer thrower, and a three-time ex-Olympian as well. And so you can get a real feel for the kind of product that we've got and the difference it's making to professional athletes already. And then hopefully we can have a chat about that soon.